You've been speaking a little bit about Esther possibly dying because the flood in the kitchen.
Well, we are being a little dramatic, but it does not take much powerful desire and abject contradiction to it to take a very strong toll on you. In other words, when you really, really want something and you are flowing in opposition to it, it's hard on you. And if you keep it up, dramatic things can happen fast. If somebody you don't know calls you on the telephone and says, "Hello, you don't know me. I'm just calling to tell you I will never call you again," you say, "All righty then."
Right.
But if someone you care about tells you that, then there's stronger discord within you initially until you're able to do something about it. So what brings forth this?
My question really comes down to, is there an allotted time when we come forward?
No, you don't, from your non-physical perspective, say, "I'm going to go forth and be there 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, 100 years. What you say is, "I'm going to come forth, adapt to the energy of this time-space reality, utilize my guidance to find my vibrational alignment with that broader perspective and thrive." And to the degree that you allow that, you do.
But all death is suicide.
Because no one can offer a vibration for you. And so you are offering your own vibration, which means you are choosing it whether you know that you are or not. All vibration is self-inflicted.
Okay, so is there a recipe, so to speak, for transcending? Just resistance?
Well, no. Now that makes it sound... Did you understand his question? Is there a recipe for dying? Is there a recipe for withdrawing from this physical experience and dying? And the inference that you've gathered from what we are talking about contradiction is hard on you, and that's what illness is about, and a lot of people die from illnesses, so resistance must be what kills you. And it is often, in other words, it's because the death experience then becomes the path of least resistance. When life experience causes you to get a strong tug of war going on within you, so that the going with the flow is the death experience, that's what that is. In other words, sometimes people get themselves into such a jam that the only way they can find relief is to release from this time-space reality altogether. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't be in this physical body and say, "Hey, this has been great, and now I'm looking forward to that," and turn your attention to the non-physical so fully and become a vibrational match to that. Let's talk about this fully here for just a moment, because Jerry and Esther have a dear friend whose father had been on the verge of making his transition for some time. And he was miserable in his body. He was feeling pain. He did not want to be here. He was in that place that so many are, where he was tired of living but scared of dying. In other words, he was not having a good time where he was. And this dear woman said to us on the telephone consultation, what's going on with him? Why doesn't he just release and make his transition? And then Jerry and Esther and this friend took a segment of refreshment for about 15 minutes, and then she called back. And during that 15 minutes, her father had made his transition. And the reason that it happened in that timing was because when this woman said, "What's gone wrong? Why isn't he making his transition?" we said to her, "Nothing is wrong. There isn't anything that's wrong. You're not doing something wrong. He's not doing something wrong. Everything is happening in perfect timing." And when she released her resistance with that thought, she breathed such a sigh of relief, because she thought that she should be able to help him. And when she released her resistance, it was in that timing that he was able to make his transition. So what is this story telling us? There are so many things that we want to give you about this. First of all, you wanted with great clarity to come forth into these physical bodies. And the reason that you wanted to come forth into these physical bodies is because you knew the variety would inspire new ideas, and you knew that those new ideas could be easily understood and that you could flow with those new ideas. You knew from the non-physical vantage point before your birth that this physical experience would cause you to give birth to a new idea, and you knew that Source would become one with that new idea immediately, and you knew that your work would only be to get up to speed with that. But many people, as they come forth into this physical experience, we want to talk about this resistance factor, because before you come into this body, you are one stream of pure positive energy. You are well-being. And while there is variety in the vibration, even in non-physical, from your physical format, it would be so insignificant you would not be able to perceive it. So it is accurate for us to, because in every particle of everything, there is contrast and variety, even in non-physical. But you, from your physical format, out here on the leading edge, would not be able to perceive that difference. It is so insignificant by human terms. So you are non-physical and you are one stream, and then you are born into this physical body, and immediately there is a splitting of energy, because you just cannot be born into an environment where you begin to perceive the things of this environment without introducing into your own vibration, those 2 points of vibrational relativity, some variance. And then as that infant, you go back to sleep and you become one. You wake up and you're split a little. You settle into the environment of your family. Some of your families are easy to feel good in. Some of your families are not so easy to feel good in. And it doesn't mean you were bad and made bad creative choices if you were born into a family that makes you feel like this. It means you understood that the contrast would be there, and you knew that you would figure out how to come back into alignment, because you were born knowing your guidance system would tell you which way was going with the flow and which way was going against the flow. So here you are in your physical human form, and you meditate, you come into one signal. You criticize, you split your signal. You praise, you come into one signal. You worry about something, you split your signal. You look for reasons to feel good, you are one signal. In other words, this emotional guidance scale is all about this vibrational relativity. So you come into this physical body, and let's say, for whatever reason, let's say you're like Esther. You mean well, but you're fixated on something that makes you feel bad. You're worried about what's going on with the government. You've been watching television and you're worried about that. Let's say that you feel out of control and that you desperately want the world to be better, but you desperately believe that it is falling apart. And so you've got yourself torn apart. Well, your physical apparatus is not doing very well under those conditions either. In other words, the illnesses that people, in other words, you know people, and you could pretty accurately state that for Esther, her low end is overwhelmment and frustration, and her high end is joy. And while she's mostly here, she can dip into that and occasionally into something even more. But if you were around Esther and you knew her, you would call her a joyful being. You would call her playful and fun to be with and an uplifter in nature. In other words, that's who she is. That's what she practices mostly. Well, you know those who are depressed. You know those who are worried. You know those who are critical. In other words, you know where people make their groove on that emotional scale. And there are different bodily conditions that sort of hang out on those scales too. In other words, someone who is usually only frustrated and mostly joyful is thriving in their physical body. Someone who is commonly worried about something may have ulcers or may have some sort of physical condition that is a match to that. Someone who has powerful wanting that they are contradicting often, they may have strokes or heart attacks or something more serious. In other words, every disease that you are living is as a result of the vibrational mix. That's why we talk about these points of vibrational relativity. The thing that we most want to impart to all of you is that you can get from wherever you are to anywhere you want to be. No exceptions. We are amazed that there are doctors and scientists who will pronounce that something is incurable. And we say, how could they possibly say that? They don't know. They don't know what path this person has walked. They don't know what desire has been born out of where they're standing. They don't know how well this person is working on closing the vibrational gap. They can give you statistics about how it's worked out with some others, but they don't know. No one knows about your vibrational gap. You are the one. So now let's say that you have a vibrational gap, and let's say that you, for whatever reason, have decided that you are no longer enjoying this physical experience. Well, we would say the reason you're not enjoying this physical experience is because you feel out of control in this gap thing. In other words, there are circumstances that have got you focused in a way that's beaten up on you pretty good, and you're just looking for relief. And friend, there is enormous relief in the depth factor. In other words, when you croak, you all worry about death. What you ought to be worried about is birth. Birth is so much harder on you than death. When you die, in one fell swoop, you release all resistance and fear and struggle, and you become one vibration. In other words, when you withdraw your attention from this time-space reality, no matter where you were on that emotional scale, boom, talk about a quantum leap. In other words, that is the death experience. But we want you to understand that, and it's fine, death is a wonderful thing. Sometimes we talk about it with such glowing words that we think you might go jump off tall buildings right after a seminar, because it is a wonderful thing to remerge back into the fullness of who you are. But that heaven's gate swings both ways, and we want you to discover ways to adjust your vibration so that you don't have to withdraw your attention in order to move up the emotional scale. We want you to, little by little, process by process, desire by desire, just close that vibrational gap. And when you do, that which you are often looking for in the death experience, that delicious release and that discovery of utter freedom and the knowledge of the power of who you are as the blessed, worthy being that you are, is known to you while you're right here in this physical body. You don't have to croak to get it.
My friend recently passed away, 49 years old, very healthy, jogged, weightlifted, and had a heart attack. Right at the top of his game, as far as his profession goes, everybody was absolutely in love with him. And he had shared just a little bit of discontent with me. Probably I was one of the only ones he had done that with, and it was quite a shock for me to hear of this.
Well, we don't want to imply that death is the punishment that you get for being in resistance. We want you to understand that that broader view sometimes dominates. In other words, we want you to understand that when you come forth into this physical body, here is the best way of approaching this subject. If you were to say to us, how can I, in this physical body, do what I came here to do and get the most out of this physical experience? We would say, get out there and mix it up and let life cause you to ask. And then each time you recognize that you're not quite up to speed with what you're asking for, do whatever it takes to come into alignment and then enjoy the manifestation that ensues. And make peace with where you are. And before you know it, you'll begin living life on such a leading edge, exciting, adventurous, delicious, good feeling level that you'll find yourself saying things, as we hear from Jerry and Esther, I want to be here forever. But we don't want you to want to be in this physical body because you're worried about what comes next. We want you to want to be in this physical body as long as it is serving you in this powerful, good feeling way. The reason that you do not stay in these bodies very long, it's really a brief time, is because from your broader point of view, you love the fresh view that exposure in that new environment gives you. And so sometimes you are such powerful beings that so much want that perspective that calls life through you, that when you get settled into life in a way that you feel that your options are narrowing, you stop calling life through you in the power. And so what happens sometimes is people who don't have as much money as that one or don't have as much of whatever, sometimes people outside of this vibrational gap that this person is living will say, oh man, he was on top of his game, he had the world by the tail. Why would someone like that choose the path of least resistance to be death? Why not clean up the vibration and remain here in this physical experience? And we say, because for whatever reason, this life experience was not producing the new ideas that we're calling the life through. And you are such vivid, passionate livers of life that you really want life to keep calling through you in a powerful way.
But I told him about you, and he struggled really hard with Abraham, was coming along slowly. But
But
it
you
was
see,
just,
your assumption is that something has gone wrong for him. And what we want you to understand is that it always goes right. In other words, the timing of the death experience is always just right. In other words, when we say we want you to make peace with where you are on the emotional scale, we mean that in the fullest sense of the word. We never want you to look at the life that anyone lives, especially the one that you're living, and feel any regret about it, because it is what it is, and from broader view, it is wonderful, you see.